A sick millionaire asked a nurse to pretend to be his daughter for a day, and hours later he was completely surprised when his wife walked into the room with a lawyer and the will. Layla was sitting at the small kitchen table, surrounded by bills and clippings of job ads. The fatigue seemed to be reflected in every detail of her posture. At 28 years old, she was a nurse, determined and independent, despite her fragile appearance. Her brown hair fell over her shoulders while her green eyes seemed to scan every line of the papers before her. Raised in an orphanage, she never had a family or anyone she could trust. The entire weight of the world seemed to fall on her shoulders. "I need to find a job soon," she muttered softly, as if saying it out loud made her need even more urgent. With nervous fingers, she leafed through the ads. In the last few days, her health seemed to be playing tricks on her. The frequent dizziness and the feeling of weakness worsened every day. But with no money for medical treatment, her only option was to find work as soon as possible. As Layla pondered what to do, the sound of the telephone broke the silence. Layla looked at the screen, an unknown number. Her heart raced, and a glimmer of hope appeared. She answered with a hesitant voice. "Hello? Good afternoon. My name is Charlotte," said a firm and authoritative voice on the other end of the line. "I'm looking for a nurse to take care of my husband. Your name was recommended to us." Layla was surprised. She didn't remember having applied for any position of this kind, but she couldn't let the opportunity slip away. "Oh, of course. I'm very interested in working as a caregiver," she replied, trying to sound confident despite the anxiety she felt. "My husband, Mr. Sebastian, has heard good things about you. We need someone with experience urgently. Could you come to our mansion today for an interview?" Luck finally seemed to smile on her. Without hesitation, Layla accepted. A few hours later, she was already in front of the imposing Sebastian mansion. She was greeted by Charlotte, a woman with a rigid expression and a calculating look, who showed no genuine emotion when talking about her husband's condition. "Mr. Sebastian has been diagnosed with a rare disease. The doctors say he has only a few months to live. I think they are exaggerating," Charlotte said in an almost indifferent tone. Layla felt a tightness in her chest. Even without knowing the man, compassion took hold of her. "I would like to meet him if possible," she asked politely, trying to better understand the situation. Before the conversation could progress, a man dressed as a gardener entered the room, visibly embarrassed at being in the way. Charlotte turned to him with disdain. "Don't you have eyes? Get out of here now!" The gardener lowered his head, clearly embarrassed. "Sorry, ma'am. You won't repeat yourself?" Layla noticed Charlotte's rude tone and the way the man reacted. Discomfort grew inside her. "Forgive me for interrupting," said the gardener. Layla felt a growing discomfort in the face of the situation, especially when witnessing Charlotte's harsh attitude. She looked at the gardener with pity, but knew she needed to focus on the reason she was there: meeting Mr. Sebastian. The fear that the man might be suffering mistreatment made him insist. "Please, I think it's important to see Mr. Sebastian before anything else," he asked, remaining calm. Charlotte reluctantly guided her to the room where her husband was resting. As soon as she entered, Layla realized that something was very wrong. The man on the bed was coughing violently, struggling to breathe. His face was pale as paper, and every effort to draw in air seemed to drain him even more. Layla didn't hesitate. She ran over to him, adjusting her position on the bed to make it easier to breathe and patting his back lightly. But Sebastian continued to struggle for air. "He's not breathing," she murmured, alarmed. Taking control of the situation, she turned him slightly and started a cardiac massage, making every effort to bring him back. After a few seconds of tension, Mr. Sebastian finally managed to suck in a strong breath. Layla let out a sigh of relief, feeling grateful that she had arrived in time. "Is everything okay now?" he asked with concern. Still panting, the man smiled weakly. "You have the hands of an angel. Thank you," he replied in a low voice. Layla noticed how weak he was. His extreme thinness and tired look betrayed his neglected health. "This man is not being taken care of as he should be," he thought, trying to avoid judgments about his wife. "I'm glad you're better now, Mr. Sebastian," he said, giving you a reassuring smile. Charlotte, who was watching from the doorway, looked visibly uncomfortable. "It looks like you did something useful," he commented, his tone full of irony. "It was just an accident. My husband is getting better, and I can take care of him alone," said Charlotte, as if to end the conversation. Mr. Sebastian, however, didn't accept it. "I still have a voice in this house. I want Layla to be my nurse," she declared firmly, her eyes shining with determination. Layla, although relieved to have helped, realized the weight of the situation. "I will do my best for you," she assured, looking briefly at Charlotte. "If you don't mind, I'd like to work full-time. His condition requires constant attention. Is there a room, even a small one, where I can stay?" Mr. Sebastian turned to his wife with renewed authority. "Put her in our best guest room. It's the least I can do to thank you for what you did for me." Weeks later, Layla had already adapted to the routine of taking care of Mr. Sebastian. Despite her dedication, she felt increasingly weak and sick. "I need to get money to go to the doctor," I thought, but I could never get away from work. She feared his condition would worsen in her absence. "I'll take care of myself as soon as he gets better," he decided, as he carried a tray with medicines and papers with medical instructions through the corridors of the imposing mansion. Although he strictly followed medical instructions, Mr. Sebastian seemed to get worse every day. Interestingly, she also felt her health declining but found strength in him to continue. "He needs me," he murmured as he trudged up the stairs. Upon entering the magnate's spacious room, she found him finishing a call. His voice, as fragile as the wind, carried concern. As soon as he hung up the phone, he fixed his eyes on Layla, who felt a weight in the air. "This could be my last day," he said, his voice grave, putting Layla on alert. Placing the tray next to the bed, she prepared to listen to him. Mr. Sebastian, with visible effort, explained that there was something important to do. Layla noticed a jar on the tray, accompanied by 2 sachets, which had not been there the day before. She found it strange, since she knew all the medicines and documents by heart. "Do you know what these are?" she asked, pointing to the items. "These medicines and documents are crucial," Mr. Sebastian replied with difficulty. "I asked someone I trust to put them here." Layla felt confused and worried. "Why is there anything I can do to help, sir?" Sebastian's eyes shone with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "Layla, your presence has brought light to my dark days, but I need you to do something for me. One last favor." "Anything, sir," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Pretend you're my daughter," he said, his voice choked with emotion and his cough interrupting his words. "Please, just for one day. I don't want to leave without experiencing what it would be like to have a daughter by my side." Layla felt the weight of his request. "Why are you asking me this, Mr. Sebastian? You'll get better, I believe that." "This is my last request," he murmured in a thin voice, the fragility showing in his eyes. Layla approached, hesitant as the man coughed violently again, the harsh sound echoing through the room. Unable to ignore it, she decided to take care of him. "I need you to pretend to be my daughter," Mr. Sebastian said in a broken voice, his pleading eyes meeting hers. The strangeness of the request broke her heart, but something in his expression made her feel she couldn't refuse. He had no one else. Before Sebastian could explain further, the door opened abruptly. Charlotte, the man's wife, strode in. Behind her, a lawyer in an impeccable suit carried a bulky briefcase. "It's time to take care of the will," she announced bluntly. Her sharp voice broke the tension that had built in the room. Layla stepped back, feeling out of place. "Is that why he asked me to do this?" she thought as she watched the scene. The tension in the room was palpable. Before she could question him, Sebastian coughed again, his ragged breaths echoing in agony. Charlotte, however, seemed indifferent. She held the papers in front of her husband and insisted, "Sign them now, it's crucial." The pressure was evident in every word. Even in his weakened state, Sebastian gathered the strength to look directly at her. "Even now in my condition, is that all that matters to you?" he murmured, his voice full of contempt and sadness. The devices monitoring his health began to emit warning signals. The sound was terrifying. Layla, overcome with urgency, exclaimed, "What's happening?" As she tried to stabilize him, she realized that the situation was serious. Despite this, Charlotte ignored the signals, insisting that her husband sign. With great effort, Sebastian tried to raise his hand to reach the documents, but his strength failed him. His head lolled to the side, and he lost consciousness. Layla immediately sprang into action. Using her nursing training, she grabbed the defibrillator and began to revive him. "He's in shock!" she shouted as she worked frantically. Charlotte, however, seemed more concerned with ensuring that the papers were signed than with her husband's life. In a sudden movement, she pushed Layla, causing the defibrillator to fall and break. "Leave the room now," she demanded, pointing to the door. Layla, ignoring the order, continued trying to save the man. Charlotte, furious, shouted, "He was fine until you arrived." But Layla knew she could not give up. She felt that a greater force was guiding her actions. Determined not to allow Sebastian to be abandoned at that critical moment, she did everything she could to stabilize him, even with limited resources. In the midst of the chaos, Layla realized that she was facing something much bigger than a medical emergency. It was a battle for a man's dignity and life. Layla murmured to herself, as if trying to gather courage, "I don't need this." Her voice, although low, was enough for Charlotte to hear. There was a firmness in those words that challenged the woman's authority. Despite everything, the nurse could not abandon Mr. Sebastian. Not like that. Her trembling fingers reached for the unscheduled medication, a decision made on the edge of desperation. "Please stay with me," she begged softly, as if her words could reach him, bringing some comfort or hope in the midst of that silent struggle. Charlotte, realizing what Layla was doing, shouted, "What do you think you're doing? Get your hands off my husband now." The authoritative voice also carried a note of barely disguised fear. But Layla barely registered the words. Her focus was on the man in front of her, whose life was slipping away with every second. Mr. Sebastian, the owner of one of the largest pharmaceutical institutions, deserved a chance. He, who had dedicated his life to saving others with his medications, now needed to be saved. Layla knew that giving him the injection was risky, but there was no other option. His heart was about to stop, and she clung to the only hope she had left. Time seemed to slow down as the medicine was administered. Layla held her breath, waiting for any sign of improvement. But what came was the opposite. The man's breathing became even more irregular, and his skin turned alarmingly pale. "This is not happening," she whispered to herself, reality hitting her like a blow. Layla had activated the emergency button installed weeks ago, at her request in preparation for a situation like this. As the alarm sounded, Charlotte turned on her with renewed fury. "You couldn't even save him before you signed the papers. Enough is enough. You've done too much damage. Get out of my house now," Charlotte ordered, her voice thick with anger and frustration. Layla felt the weight of guilt threatening to crush her. With no other choice, she was escorted out by a housekeeper. Layla felt the world spin around her as she struggled to support herself on the grass after being pushed by the guard. Her mind was in turmoil, but her body felt even more fragile. The weakness that had been consuming her for weeks threatened to overwhelm her completely. It was at that moment that the mansion's gardener appeared with unexpected kindness. "Are you okay?" Sebastian asked, his soft voice contrasting with his rustic appearance. I'm fine," Layla lied, although she knew it was far from it. "The one who's worse is Mr. Sebastian." With the gardener's help, she managed to stand up. The sound of the ambulance sirens echoed in the distance, and a renewed determination took hold of her. "I need to go to the hospital," she murmured, knowing that Charlotte would never allow her to accompany the medical team. With no time to waste, Layla headed for the taxi rank, each step a fight against the dizziness that threatened to overcome her. Getting into a taxi, she held on tightly to the back seat, gathering strength as she looked at the pocket of her robe, where she had kept the papers Mr. Sebastian had given her. "Please let there be something useful here," she prayed softly, opening the envelope with trembling hands. The contents shocked her. A positive result from a paternity test. It revealed the existence of a previously unknown son of Mrs. Sebastian. Even more alarming, the enclosed medical report indicated that this person suffered from a rare disease, the same one that now threatened the tycoon's life. "Who could it be?" Layla murmured, her desperation growing. There was no name or any clue as to the son's identity, only the diagnosis. She needed to act quickly. When she arrived at the hospital, she went straight to the reception, facing the professional impassiveness of the receptionist. "I need to see Mr. Sebastian. It's urgent." "I'm sorry, only family members can visit him at this time," the receptionist replied with a tone of restrained sympathy. Layla hesitated. The memory of Charlotte's request came flooding back. It was risky, but the moment called for quick decisions. Taking a deep breath, she showed him the documents. "I'm his daughter," she said, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "These papers prove it. I need to see him now." The receptionist studied the documents for a moment before nodding. "Follow me, please." The hospital corridors seemed to stretch on forever as Layla walked behind the woman. Layla felt each step echo the uncertainty that filled her mind. "What am I doing?" she thought, with the weight of the decision weighing down on each breath. Despite this, she knew she could not hesitate. Her promise to Mr. Sebastian, made in a moment of vulnerability, would not be broken. She needed to be by his side, even if it meant lying. When she reached the door to the room, she stopped, her heart beating wildly. She took a deep breath before entering, and when she opened the door, the sight paralyzed her. The businessman was connected to machines that monitored every heartbeat, every sign of life. The monotonous sound of the machines was a cruel reminder of human fragility. A doctor stood nearby, focused on his notes. Layla approached slowly, her heart clenching with guilt and pain. "Mr. Sebastian, it's me, Layla. I came as soon as I could," she said with a trembling voice. She knew she wouldn't get an answer, but she had to say it. She touched his hand gently, swallowing hard at the cold touch. The words of the tycoon asking her to pretend to be his daughter echoed again in her mind. "I am your daughter," she told the doctor, who was now watching her intently. The lie stung, but it was necessary. After a pause, the doctor sighed and answered gravely, "Mr. Sebastian is in a deep coma. It is unlikely that he will survive until the end of the day." Each word was like a blow. Layla felt the world crumble around her. She needed to process what she had just heard, but there was no time. "I need to be alone with Sebastian. With my father?" she asked, struggling to maintain her composure. The doctor nodded and left the room. As soon as she was alone, she sat down next to the bed. "Miss Sebastian, I have not forgotten my promise," she began, her voice cracking with emotion. "Today, I will be your daughter." She squeezed the tycoon's hand as tears flowed. "If we were father and daughter, we would have a day at the beach without worries, sharing stories and laughter. We would end the afternoon with coffee by the sea, a perfect day." The words, full of hope and sadness, sounded like a small consolation. Suddenly, the door was flung open. Charlotte, Sebastian's wife, entered, filling the room with a cutting energy. "What do you think you're doing here?" she demanded, her eyes fixed on Layla with contempt. "I thought I made it clear that you were not welcome." Layla, exhausted, stood up. "I am his daughter," she said firmly, holding out an envelope that she would deliver to Sebastian's lawyer. Charlotte laughed, a dry, cruel sound. "You, his daughter? Look at you, the way you look. You would never be part of our family." "It doesn't matter what you think," Layla replied, gathering all her strength. "I'm staying. Sebastian won't be alone." The discussion was interrupted by the entrance of the medical team, called by Charlotte. "She's disturbing the patient. I demand that she be removed now," she ordered. Layla tried to resist, but tension and fatigue overcame her. Before she fainted, she noticed something. Sebastian's fingers moved slightly. In a weak voice, she murmured, "He's alive." The medical team rushed to attend to the tycoon, while Layla was taken away, still determined to fulfill her promise. Layla woke up to the muffled sounds of machines monitoring a rhythm that seemed increasingly fragile. The dimness of the hospital room enveloped everything in a melancholic tone. Her body protested with each attempt to move, but she knew she couldn't waste any more time. The recent events still swirled in her mind like a nightmare from which she could not escape. "I can't stay here. I can't afford a hospital like this," she whispered to herself with growing determination. Ignoring the dizziness, she shook off the cramps in her arm, holding on to her willpower as she slowly stood up. The envelope with Mr. Sebastian's exams was on the nearby chair, along with her purse. With trembling hands, she picked up the phone and dialed the number written on the papers. After a few rings, a male voice answered on the other end. "Dr. Enrique speaking. How can I help?" "I'm Layla, Mr. Sebastian's nurse. He's in serious condition at the hospital. I found your contact information between his exams and I need to know what to do," she explained, trying to keep her tone firm despite the urgency. The man on the other end hesitated for a moment before answering. "Layla, listen to me carefully. Mr. Sebastian is part of an experimental study to treat a rare disease. It's a revolutionary program. But we're still in the final stages of testing. We have no guarantees. But I need you not to leave him alone. I'll be on my way to the hospital right now." The doctor's words weighed heavily on Layla's shoulders. She hung up, clutching the envelope to her chest as she muttered to herself, "I need to be with Sebastian. I can't fail him now." Gathering all the strength she had left, she left the room. Each step down the hallway felt like a battle. Her legs threatened to give out, but she kept going, driven by something greater than the physical pain. "Wait for me, Mr. Sebastian. I won't leave you alone," she muttered like a mantra. Finally, she reached the door to the room. The sight she found was one of controlled chaos. Doctors and nurses surrounded the tycoon's bed, their expressions a mix of concern and urgency. Fragments of technical conversations indicated that the situation was critical. Layla tried to process the situation while her mind was still spinning between confusion and terror. The doctor's words echoed in her mind, but what frightened her most was the possibility that she had failed. She remembered the scene in Sebastian's room, the doctor's attempts to save his life, the anguish in everyone's eyes. The fight was intense, and despite all their efforts, it seemed that he was slowly slipping away. "Don't abandon him," she had begged, her voice breaking. Now she felt the bitterness of uncertainty, the fear that everything was lost. But at some point, she had been removed from the room, trying to ensure that her health was also monitored. However, what she wanted most was to be there with Sebastian, holding his hand, doing her best not to let him go. The doctor approached her, his expression impassive, but his eyes filled with regret. "We're doing our best," he said, his voice full of compassion but no promises. "But we have to be realistic. Mr. Sebastian is in critical condition." Layla, her vision blurred by weakness and emotional pain, tried to steady herself in her resolve. "Don't tell me to understand," she snapped, her words firm despite the weakness that was taking over her. "If there's any chance, any possibility, please don't give up on him. He believed in me and I won't abandon him." The pressure in her muscles and extreme fatigue began to take over her body, but her mind continued to fight. "You can't give up now," she insisted, even as her vision grew increasingly blurry and fatigue threatened to overwhelm her. The doctor watched her with concern, but was interrupted by the sudden increase in her discomfort. Weakness took over her body, and before she could continue to argue, darkness enveloped her and Layla passed out. Days later, she woke up in a new hospital room, the bright light that invaded the room making her blink slowly, trying to adjust. She was confused, her mind clouded. "Where am I? What happened?" she thought, as the memories of everything that had happened before she lost consciousness came back in fragmented form. The only thought that dominated her mind was Sebastian. What had happened to him? She realized that she was in a different hospital, different from the one where he was admitted. "They saw that I can't afford to be admitted to that hospital," she thought. What really mattered was that she felt better. Her muscles no longer ached. The physical pain had disappeared. She managed to get up, feeling stronger, as if the weakness that had previously dominated her had been replaced by renewed energy. Still confused, she pressed the doorbell button and looked around, trying to find someone to explain the situation. The soft sound of a door opening was the first sign that someone was approaching. An elegant man entered the room, and when he noticed that Layla was awake, he smiled. "I'm glad you're awake," he said, approaching the bed. "I'm Dr. Enrique," he added, his tone calm and comforting. Layla, still a little disoriented, tried to settle herself in bed, trying to absorb the information. "I spoke to Mr. Sebastian on the phone, and I'm his trusted doctor and pharmacist," the doctor continued with a warm smile. "How are you? I need to know." The concern in Layla's voice was evident. "How is Mr. Sebastian? What happened? I'm so worried," she asked, her voice shaking. Dr. Enrique smiled, trying to reassure her. "Everything will be explained soon. The doctor in charge is on his way. Don't worry, you're in good hands." But Layla's anxiety seemed to increase with each word. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you did for my friend Sebastian," she said, looking at the doctor with gratitude. "He sacrificed a lot for his health to be treated. People like you are rare." Layla's praise was interrupted by the entrance of another doctor into the room. He seemed urgent and soon began to bombard Dr. Enrique with questions about Sebastian's condition. However, the doctor only answered calmly while checking the machines that monitored Layla's vital signs. "She is in excellent health thanks to the medication," the doctor said, maintaining his concentration. "But we need to continue monitoring her progress." Layla, still worried, looked at the two doctors. I don't have the money to pay for treatment at this hospital," she said, her anxiety now mixing with concern about the future. "I'm unemployed at the moment," she continued, her expression apprehensive. I wish Mr. Sebastian would be okay and that he would find another nurse to take care of him, like I was doing, but now I don't know what will happen." Dr. Enrique, noticing Layla's growing discomfort, tried to calm her down. "Don't worry about it," he said with a reassuring smile. "The Institute will cover everything, thanks to the excellent care you gave Mr. Sebastian. As for your work, there's something you need to see as soon as you're discharged." Layla, overcome by curiosity but not wanting to fool herself, hesitated. She knew that Charlotte would hardly give her a letter of recommendation. "I'll find a way to sort my life out after a few certification exams," she thought determinedly, while anxiety still gripped her. Finally, after passing the necessary exams, Layla was discharged from the hospital. Dr. Enrique accompanied her to Sebastian's mansion. When she got there, Layla stopped for a moment, looking at the house that, for months, had been her refuge. "I'm going to get my things," she asked, looking at the doctor. "Actually, there's someone waiting for you inside," he replied with an enigmatic smile. "I'll be back later. I need to check on a program from the Institute." After thanking her and saying goodbye, Layla approached the mansion, feeling a whirlwind of emotions. When she opened the door to the living room, she was speechless. There was Sebastian, standing and smiling at her, completely healthy. "I can't believe it," she murmured, her eyes filled with disbelief and happiness. "Oh God, thank you," she prayed, overcome with emotion. Sebastian walked toward her, smiling. "Tell me, how did this happen?" he asked, surprised and also relieved. Layla, with wide eyes, could not believe what she was seeing. Sebastian, who had been confined to bed for so long, was now standing and walking. I can't believe it. You're walking," she exclaimed, beaming with happiness. Sebastian was overjoyed to be able to walk on his own. With quick steps, he approached Layla, and before she could react, he wrapped her in a tight hug, visibly moved. "Layla, you've saved me more times than you can imagine," he said, his voice firm but full of emotion. "But there's more to our story than you think." Layla took a step back, confused. The seriousness in Sebastian's eyes made her feel a tightness in her chest. "Why does he seem nervous?" she thought, before forcing a smile and trying to understand what was happening. "So tell me everything, Sebastian." "I'm trying to understand everything that happened, but I have so many questions. Who is your son? Did you manage to save him too?" she asked anxiously, still unable to process the whole situation. Sebastian took a deep breath, his eyes shining with intense emotion as he looked at Layla. "I actually have a daughter," he said, with a smile that conveyed both excitement and a hint of apprehension. "I didn't know who she was until the day my health gave out. I got the tests, and that's when I found her. I saved her." Layla let out a sigh of relief, not knowing exactly how to react. With each word Sebastian said, she felt more confused, but at the same time relieved. "I'm glad to see you here," healthy and smiling at me, he continued. You're my daughter, Layla. Layla froze. The shock was visible on her face. You said what? He asked, his voice shaking and full of emotion. I can't believe what I'm hearing. Sebastian smiled, his face softer now. Yes, Layla, you're my daughter. The words seemed impossible to process. Layla, her eyes wide, couldn't hold back her tears. How is this possible? She asked, hugging Sebastian tightly, as if trying to confirm that all of this was real. Are you referring to the request? What did you do to me to make me believe that I was someone else? This is a joke, isn't it? Sebastian looked at her sadly. No, Layla, it's not a joke. You're my daughter. I asked you to be someone else because I thought I would die soon. I didn't want you to suffer, to have a father and then lose him soon after. I found out that you spent your life in an orphanage, dreaming of finding your father. And that day, I couldn't tell you the truth. Layla struggled to understand Sebastian's words, unearthing emotions she didn't even know existed. And my mother? What did she think of this? She asked, her eyes watering. Sebastian lowered his gaze, as if those memories still hurt him. Your mother. Unfortunately, she didn't love me. We were married, but she was never happy with me. She left without saying goodbye and went to live with another man. When she ran away, she was pregnant with you. If I had known all this, our story would have been very different, he said with a heavy sigh. Layla, with a heavy heart, let the tears flow. She left you. In an orphanage? She asked, her voice breaking. This is all so hard to understand. Yes, she left you in an orphanage right after you were born. And after that, her life didn't last long. Sebastian paused, and the silence in the room was heavy. Layla, now crying more freely, didn't know what to say. I wish everything was different, she said, her voice choked with the pain of what she had just discovered. I had a father, and I never knew. Sebastian, his pained look softening, approached Layla and hugged her. Finally, you have a family, he said with a sad smile. I have no words to thank God for giving me this chance. And you, Layla, now have a father. But Layla still had many doubts, many questions that needed to be answered. How did you know all this, Sebastian? How did you find out that I am your daughter? She asked, still feeling the weight of the revelation. Sebastian became serious, Charlotte's gaze conveying the gravity of what he was about to reveal. He knew he was sharing a part of his life that would change everything for Layla, but he could no longer hide the truth. When I got sick, I started to investigate if there was someone I could share my inheritance with, he began, his voice low and full of unspoken emotions. But Charlotte never told me about you. During a crisis, I went to look for medicine and saw a picture of you. At that moment, I knew that you could be my daughter because you have your mother's face, exactly as she was when she was your age. Layla looked at him, surprised by the revelation, but Sebastian continued. That's when I hired an investigator to look for you. When he found you, he still wasn't sure we were related. I hired you because I was afraid you would have the same disease and be alone. Charlotte wanted you fired, but I wouldn't let her. Layla was stunned, her heart pounding at Sebastian's words. She had always had doubts, but now everything was starting to make sense. I hired you because I saw you as my daughter before I had the paternity test, he said. I didn't know you were sick too, because you hid your pain to take care of me. Layla, touched by Sebastian's confession, couldn't help but cry. She had always done everything with love, even without knowing he was her father. I always wanted to know everything about you. I loved you like a daughter because you were always like family to me, she said, still emotional. But Sebastian needed to reveal more. When the test results came back, I didn't have time to tell you about the DNA. I didn't want to hurt you anymore. And then I found out that Charlotte was drugging me to make me worse, so she could get my inheritance. The pain on Sebastian's face was visible, but he stood his ground. I didn't know that. It devastated me, but it strengthened my resolve to protect you. You are my one and only true heir. Layla, still processing the words and the avalanche of revelations, felt a mix of relief and anger. Relief at finally understanding her origins, but anger at learning of Charlotte's betrayal. "What are we going to do with Charlotte?" she asked, still perplexed by everything she had heard. Sebastian looked at her firmly, his eyes resolute. "Charlotte's lawyers were ready to take everything from me, but now she's been arrested. Justice has been served. She won't go unpunished." Layla, however, still had one crucial doubt. "And the cure, is it permanent?" she asked anxiously. Sebastian smiled slightly, a smile that reflected the hope Layla felt as she saw her cure approaching. "Yes, the cure is permanent. The medical team managed to find the solution. The medicine you gave me was being tested as part of that effort. Thank God it saved you, and now, my daughter, we are cured. We have a whole life ahead of us." Layla felt a wave of relief and joy. She smiled through her tears, feeling like something wonderful was about to begin. "This is amazing. So is there hope for both of us?" she asked, emotion brimming in her voice. "Yes, my daughter, there is much hope. I have booked our flights for when you get out of the hospital," Sebastian replied, smiling tenderly. He was more excited than ever. "Did you know that I listened to you while you were in a coma?" he asked, feeling touched by Layla's constant presence in his life, even in the most difficult moments. "Yes, my daughter. I will do everything I can to make sure we have our special day on the beach, and many more after that." Layla nodded gratefully, her eyes shining with love and hope. "Thank you, Dad, for everything," she said, the word Dad sounding so natural on her lips. Sebastian, overcome with emotion, could not hide his smile when he was called Dad for the first time. "Thank you, my daughter. I am happy to have you here with us." The emotion was written all over their faces. In the days that followed the emotional revelation in Sebastian's office, father and daughter began working together to strengthen their new family bond and face the challenges imposed by Charlotte. Justice prevailed, and Charlotte ended up paying for her attempts to usurp Sebastian's inheritance, as well as putting her health at risk. With his health significantly improved, thanks to the medical innovation that his own company helped develop, Sebastian fulfilled the promise he had made to Layla. Together, they would face everything with courage. And so they celebrated the first of many special moments. One of the first milestones of this new life was an unforgettable day at the beach, where they celebrated not only Sebastian's recovery, but also the new life that lay ahead of them. The day was filled with laughter, deep conversations, and planning for the future. Layla, in turn, took on a new role at Sebastian's Pharmaceutical Institute, where her experience as a nurse was invaluable. She began training other professionals to recognize the signs of abuse in family settings, helping to transform the institute into a support center for those who suffered in silence. Her work soon gained recognition outside the institute, with invitations to speak at health and wellness conferences, where she shared both her professional discoveries and her personal story, touching people deeply and inspiring others to join her cause. Sebastian, now fully recovered and inspired by his daughter's strength and compassion, directed the institute's resources to support Layla's cause. They established awareness programs and partnered with organizations dedicated to protecting patient rights. Together, father and daughter created a new standard of care, where patient safety and well-being were the priority. Together with Layla and Dr. Enrique, the Institute developed new policies to ensure that all patients received care in a safe and supportive environment, and the impact of their work was immense, changing and saving many lives. Sebastian and Layla's journey was not just about survival, but about rebuilding, love, and struggle. Every victory, no matter how small, was celebrated together, and happiness was finally present in their lives, marked by gratitude and deep respect for each other. If you liked this story, we invite you to give me a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to continue bringing you exciting stories almost every day. Don't miss the next incredible narrative that is coming to your screen. We really appreciate your support. At the end, you will have access to 2 more videos that I am sure will move you. I hope to see you in the next story.